first thing Mirabel Oakes noticed, the night everything changed, was not the blood on his hands. It was that he let her touch them. The Voss house sat on a private road in Chevy Chase, with no neighbours close enough to hear anything, which was the point of it. Mirabel had understood this on the day she accepted the placement. Live in nursing care for an elderly patriarch, good salary, private room, no visitors. She had not understood it fully until she was already inside. Harlan Voss was not the elderly patriarch. Harlan was the son, 51 years old, with the kind of face that photographs well at charity dinners and does something different in private. He had come home from wherever he spent his Tuesday evenings, and he was in the hallway before she reached the stairs, and she knew immediately from the quality of the silence he was making that tonight was different from the other nights. She catalogued herself in 2 seconds. Left side, 3 bruised ribs from 10 days ago, healed to about 60%. Right wrist, sprained from last Thursday, functional, no footwear. She had taken off her shoes at the top of the stairs. He said her name the way people say a word they are tired of. She turned and walked the other way, and he was faster than she had accounted for. His hand came down on her left shoulder and spun her against the panelled wall, and the impact knocked her breath sideways. She registered the pain, set it aside, and assessed no fracture, soft tissue only, upright. She pushed off the wall and ran. He was a large man, and she had been in this house for 4 months, and she knew which floorboards sang, and he did not. She reached the supply room at the end of the east corridor and got the door closed and the bolt thrown before he hit it. The bolt was not strong. She knew that. She had looked at it the first week and thought she should say something, and then decided not to, because Harlan Voss was not a man who liked to be noticing things. His palm hit the door once. Then again. She stood with her back against the shelving and breathed. The supply room was 3 meters by 4. It held cleaning products, a stack of folded linen, a locked cabinet of the patriarch's medications, and a narrow window that did not open wide enough for a person. She had checked. Her phone was in her left pocket. She pulled it out. Her hands were not shaking, and she took a moment to note that, because it had not always been true. She thought about who she could call. She thought about it honestly, the way you think about something you have already thought about many times before, testing the same edges. The precinct that covered this address had 2 officers who attended the Voss family's annual foundation dinner. She knew this because she had served drinks at it in October, and overheard Harlan laughing with one of them about something she had not caught entirely. She had not needed to catch it entirely. Her family was in Baton Rouge. Her mother and her sister and her mother's boyfriend, who was not someone she could call under any circumstances she could currently imagine. She had 3 friends from nursing school. One was in Singapore, one had a newborn, one had stopped answering her messages in September, and Mirabel had let it happen because she was tired of having the same conversation that always ended with her saying she was fine. She was not fine. She was standing in a supply closet while a man broke through a door, and she was running through a list of people she could call and arriving, as she always arrived at no one. The bolt cracked, not broken yet. Soon she looked at her phone. She had one other number. She had not thought of it as his number. The first time she put it in her phone, she had thought of it as an emergency contact for a man who might need medical assistance in a public setting, because that was what she was, a nurse, and that was what she did, 3 months ago. The hallway of the Georgetown University Hospital, 11 at night. She had been finishing a double shift at the acute care ward, which she took when the Voss placement left her with enough unspent energy to need the money to matter less. She had been walking to the elevator with her coat over her arm, and she had seen a man standing very still outside room 417, and the way he was standing had stopped her. Not grief exactly. Older than grief. The kind of stillness that comes after you have been still for a very long time. She had stopped walking. She had said quietly that the chair in the family room at the end of the corridor was more comfortable if he was going to be there for a while. She had not said anything else. He had turned and looked at her, and she had not looked away, because she was a nurse and she had learned a long time ago that looking away from a person in pain was not kindness. His eyes were dark. Later she would understand that dark was not the correct word. He had said if you ever need anything, and had given her a card. No company name, no title, just a number and a name. Caelum, she had thought, this is a very expensive suit for a man standing alone in a hospital hallway. She had said thank you and got in the elevator. She had not deleted the number. Now she pressed call. It rang twice. Mirabel, his voice was the same as she remembered it. Unhurried, she told him where she was. She told him what was happening. She did not apologize for calling, and she did not explain more than she needed to. 17 minutes. Do not open the door. The bolt cracked again. She looked at it. 15, her eyes went to the door. He's almost through. A pause, brief, 15, a pause, and then nothing more. He had already moved. The dinner was at the estate of a man named Aldrich Fenmore, who had been hosting gatherings in that house since 1791, and who still believed, as he had then, that the quality of the whisky reflected directly on the quality of his soul. Caelum thought the whisky was acceptable. He was standing near the window with a glass of it, doing what he did at these events, which was assess and calculate without appearing to do either, while 3 members of the Meridian Conclave's lower council argued about territorial border adjustments that had been argued about for 40 years and would be argued about for 40 more. He was contributing very little to the conversation. He preferred it that way. His phone was in his inside pocket, and he felt it before he heard it. The people who called that number knew not to call it without cause. There were not many of them. He looked at the screen. Mirabel Oaks. Georgetown Hospital. The nurse with the grey coat who had told him about the chair, he excused himself from the conversation without finishing the sentence he had started, which was the kind of thing people in that room noticed, and walked to the corridor and answered. He listened. He had not moved in any way that could be described as dramatic. He had set the whisky glass on the hall table with the same care he had taken picking it up. He had buttoned his jacket. He had walked to the front door. His driver, a man named Tomas, who had worked for him for 60 years, was in the car before Caelum had finished descending the steps. Tomas did not ask where they were going. He looked at Caelum's face and started the engine. Later, Tomas would tell the household staff that in 6 decades he had seen the king in many conditions and many moods, and that he had never once seen him look like that. Like a man who had been given permission for something he had been restraining for a very long time. 7 minutes. The bolt was going. She could see the screws working loose from the wood around the strike plate, one thread at a time. She had put her back against the shelving opposite and put both hands flat on the edge of a shelf, and she was breathing with the rhythm she used in resuscitation. In for 4. Out for 4. Not because she needed to, but because it helped her think. She thought about the laryngoscope in her nursing kit. She thought about the locked medication cabinet and what was in it, and whether she could pick a lock and whether any of it would be relevant. She decided the laryngoscope. 7 minutes and 20 seconds. The black Bentayga crossed the Whitehurst freeway at 94 miles per hour, which was 39 miles per hour above the posted limit, and Tomas did not reduce speed at the 2 red lights between the freeway and the Chevy Chase boundary. 12 minutes. The bolt gave on one side. She could see the gap at the doorframe, thin as a credit card, and she could see his fingers trying it, and she moved to the left, away from the line of the door, back against the linen shelving, and she had the laryngoscope in her right hand. Her ribs ached. She had catalogued that, and she had set it down. 12 minutes and 40 seconds. He told Tomas the service road on the east side of the property. Not the gate. Tomas said nothing. The Bentayga turned. 15 minutes. The door was giving. She could hear the screws pulling from the frame entirely, the little sounds of them, and she braced. She thought about her mother at the hospital, a long time ago, saying, "You are so much to carry, I love you, I just mean that sometimes you are so much." She thought about being 7 years old in a doorway. She thought, "I called someone." 15 minutes and 50 seconds. He was already on the east side of the property. He looked at the house. He looked at the upper windows and the lower windows and the supply wing at the east end, and he moved. 16 minutes. The door came in. 16 minutes and 40 seconds. Harlan Voss was raising his hand for the third time when the east wall of the supply corridor was no longer there. There was no other word for what Caelum did to that wall. He did not open the door. He walked through the structural panelling of the east corridor as though it were a suggestion he had decided not to take, and the sound of it was enormous, and for one long second Mirabel simply stood with the laryngoscope in her hand and looked at him. He looked at Harlan. Harlan was a large man, 51 years old, accustomed to the geography of power in most rooms he entered. He took 2 steps backward. Caelum crossed the distance between them in a movement that Mirabel's eyes did not fully register, and he took hold of Harlan's right wrist, the one that had been raised, and he did something precise and controlled to it that produced a sound she knew from acute care and would not describe in polite company. Harlan did not raise that hand again. He could not. The 2 household staff had appeared in the corridor by then, and Harlan's dinner guest, a man in a catering company tie, who had not left when the other guests did. Caelum looked at all of them once, with a particular quality of attention that produced the same result it always produced, which was that none of them moved or spoke. He said to Harlan's assistant, a young woman named Patricia, who had watched 4 months of this from behind a desk and done nothing, that she had 48 hours to leave this employment and to provide documentation of what she had witnessed to a specific attorney he named, and that the attorney would be calling her, and that if she chose not to cooperate, the firm that employed Harlan's father, who provided the funding for his son's life, would receive a summary of this evening by morning. Patricia said she understood. He turned then. He was bleeding. She had not seen it happen in the speed of what had occurred, but there was a gash along his forearm from the panelling he had gone through, and his right hand was dark with it. He was looking at her face, cataloguing it the same way she had catalogued herself, and she watched him assess the left side of her ribs and her wrist and the mark on her face where her head had hit the wall. His expression did not change, but something in it settled. She looked at his hands. She was a nurse. She had cleaned blood off things and people for 11 years. She looked around the supply room and found the sterile wipes on the second shelf, and she crossed to him and took his right hand in both of hers, and she began to clean it. He went very still. She worked methodically. She did not rush. She did not apologize. She did not look away from what she was doing. She did not flinch. She did not notice, until she was nearly finished, that he had not looked away from her face the entire time. Very quietly, almost to himself, you did not have to do that. She set the used wipe aside and looked up at him. You came in 16 minutes and 40 seconds. She set the used wipe aside. I timed it. Something moved in his expression that she did not have a word for yet. He kneeled, not in defeat, in deliberate address. His dark eyes level with hers, and his voice entirely different from any version of it she had heard. You will not go back to this house. His voice had changed entirely from the one he used in corridors and at dinners. You will not go back to any version of a life that contained this house. I am offering you somewhere safe, and I am asking nothing for it. You may refuse." She looked at him. She thought about the list of people she had run through and where it had ended. Okay, she let go of the shelf behind her. He drove her himself. Tomas sat in the front and did not look in the mirror and did not speak, which she appreciated. She sat in the back with her nursing kit in her lap and Caelum beside her, and he produced a first aid kit from the door compartment that was significantly more comprehensive than most first aid kits she had encountered, and she thought about that without commenting on it. She looked at his forearm. "That needs to be closed." She nodded at his forearm. He said it would close on its own, and when she looked at him with the specific expression she used for patients who said that, he turned his arm over and she watched, in the dark of the moving car, as the edges of the laceration drew toward each other and sealed. He treated her wrist. He was careful in a way that large people are not always careful, attentive to the precise amount of pressure, and she let him because her hands were occupied with holding her own composure in one piece. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Without looking up from the bandage, that sentence is not allowed. She almost said something that would have been a version of the same apology, and she stopped herself. "You don't know me." She looked at the window instead of him. "I know that you told me about a chair. And I know that when you called me, you told me exactly what I needed to know without anything extra. And I know that you cleaned my hands without flinching." She looked out the window. Georgetown to somewhere she did not recognize yet, the city thinning at the edges, a road she did not know. "What are you?" she asked. He told her. He was factual and complete, and not theatrical about it, which she found, later, was characteristic of him. "Are there others? Many? Are they all like you?" "No." She nodded and looked out the window again. The estate appeared at the end of a private road, and it was the size of a village, and every light was on. She slept for 11 hours, which she had not done in 4 months. The room they gave her had a window that faced east, and she woke to real light, which the Voss house had not had, because Harlan preferred the blackout blinds in every room, for reasons she had stopped thinking about. This window had curtains the colour of old linen, and they moved in a small heat from the radiator, and she lay and watched them for a moment before she was fully awake. The bed was real. That was the word that arrived. Real, she had slept in a single bed in a basement room in Chevy Chase, and this bed was an actual serious piece of furniture, the kind that had been slept in by many people over a long time. There was a tray on the table by the window, coffee, proper coffee, and a plate of things that were not the meal replacement bars and institutional oatmeal of the last 4 months. There was a small folded card on the tray, written in a hand that was very old-fashioned in its construction, which said only, "Whenever you are ready." She showered. She put on the clothes that had been left, which were the right size, and she did not think too hard about that. She found him in a room off the main hall that served as a study and possibly as a space for very old maps, of which there were many. He was reading something, and he stood when she came in, which was the kind of thing that takes practice to do naturally. "The coffee is good. I'll tell Mrs. Harrow," they sat. He asked her how she was feeling with the directness of someone who wanted an actual answer, and she gave him one, which was functional. He asked about the ribs and she said 60% yesterday, probably 70 today. He said that she could stay as long as she needed, or as long as she liked, and that those were different things and she could choose either. She looked around the room. The maps. The books that went to the ceiling. A window with actual light. "I don't usually take up this much space." "You have not yet begun to take up the appropriate amount of space." She did not know what to do with that sentence, so she drank her coffee, and he let her, which was the correct thing. It was the only quiet morning the house would have for a long time. The doors of the study opened on the afternoon of the second day, and they did not open because anyone knocked. There were 4 of them. 3 she did not recognize, men of various apparent ages in identical dark coats, with something at the lapel she could not read at distance. The 4th she knew by the quality of the silence that preceded him. He was called Crest. She understood this from the way the 3 men behind him angled toward him when he stopped. He was not the oldest looking of the group, but he was the most still, and stillness, she had learned in the last 48 hours, meant something different in this world than it did in hers. Caelum stood. He did not move toward them. She was present. She was. Caelum did not look away from Crest. Then you know what the law requires. I know what you believe the law requires. Crest's gaze moved to her and she did not look away, because she had learned that looking away from things was not useful. Crest's gaze settled on her with a courtesy she did not trust. You witnessed the execution of a high elder of the Meridian Conclave in the lawful exercise of his authority. Under the Conclave Charter, ratified in 1842 and amended in 1961, a mortal witness to such an event is required to undergo memory extraction within 72 hours of the event in order to preserve the security of our governance structure. This is not punitive. It is procedural. She looked at Caelum. Caelum's voice was quiet. She would not survive it. That is a consideration outside the scope of the Charter. The room was very still. What the elder was doing in that house when I found him constitutes a violation of the Accord on Mortal Interference. The elder came to collect a woman who had been signed over as a bonded asset under a debt contract she did not know existed and did not consent to. You may present that to the full conclave and let them weigh it against the witness provision. That process takes 30 days. The witness provision requires action in 72 hours. Surrender her and the process proceeds. Shelter her and you are in violation of the Charter, your territorial charter is suspended, and every house under your protection is forfeit. 7 factions will move on your holdings by the end of the week. Caelum walked to where Crest was standing. He stopped at a distance that was not comfortable. Whoever reaches for her next does not leave this room with both hands. Crest looked at him for a long moment. Then you stand alone. I have stood alone before. He stepped back. Go back and tell them what I told you to tell them. Crest went. The doors closed, though no one had touched them. Mirabel sat in the chair she had been sitting in and looked at the maps on the walls and thought about the fact that a man had signed her name to a document she had never seen, and that another man had come to collect her, and that a third man had broken a wall rather than let that happen. She thought about what any of this cost. She thought about what she always thought about. She found him in the East Hall at midnight. She had not slept. She had her coat on and her nursing kit over her shoulder and her good shoes, not the ones she had been wearing in the Voss house, but the sensible ones she had brought in her bag. I'm going to call Crest. He turned from the window. He did not move toward her. 7 factions, your entire territory, every house under your protection. All of that is at risk because of me. Because a man I worked for signed a contract with my name on it, and I was standing in the wrong corridor at the wrong time, and I saw something I shouldn't have seen. That is not a reason for all of that. I'm not a reason for all of that. She said it the way she had always said it, calmly, with the kind of reasonableness that made it sound like fact. I have always been something other people carry. An obligation. A weight they were too polite to put down. I am telling you that you do not have to carry me. I am choosing to put myself down. Who told you that? She stopped. Again, very quietly, who was the first person to tell you that you were a weight? She did not answer. She looked at her shoes. He crossed the hall. He stopped in front of her, and he did not touch her, and he did not raise his voice. You are not going to call Crest. You are going to stay in this house. and I am going to tell you something in the morning that I want you to have slept on first, because I do not think you will believe it if I tell you now. You don't owe me anything. No. He did not move. I don't. He waited. She took her coat off. In the morning he came to the library, where she had been since 6, and he sat across from her, and he looked at her for a moment without speaking, and she let him. When I walked through that wall, I already knew what I was going to find. I had known something was wrong in that house since the night in the hospital corridor. You had a bruise on the left side of your jaw that was 4 to 5 days old, and you spoke to me like a person who had learned to take up very little air. I should have acted then. I did not, because I was not certain it was my place, and that was a failure of judgment I do not intend to repeat. You couldn't have known. I am 412 years old, Mirabel. I have seen that bruise on 400 years of people. I knew. He moved from the chair and he kneeled on the floor of the library with the same deliberateness with which he did everything, and he was tall enough that kneeling he was almost at eye level with her. I want to tell you what I have found in 412 years of looking. I have found that most people who are worth anything spend their entire lives being told that they are not. That the measurement is always being applied by the person who benefits from the answer coming up small. I have been in the company of people who are considered powerful and significant by every standard the world applies to those words, and I have not found in 4 centuries a single one of them who would have cleaned blood off a stranger's hands at midnight without flinching and without asking what it meant for them. She opened her mouth. I did not come to that house out of pity. Pity is what you give something you consider beneath you. I came because in one conversation in a hospital hallway, you were more present to me than anyone I had spoken to in 11 years, and when your number came up on my phone, there was no calculation about it. I have always been something other people carry. I know that is what you believe. I am telling you that belief was installed in you by people who needed you smaller than you are. I am not asking you to stop believing it today. I am asking you to let it sit next to something else for a while. She looked at him. She had been a nurse for 11 years. She had held people in the worst moments of their lives, and she knew what it looked like when someone said something true. She felt something very old and very tired begin, slowly and with great reluctance, to put itself down. She reached out. She put her hand on his face. He did not move. 412, and some months. Something in him eased slightly, the way old things ease when they are finally said aloud. That's a long time to stand alone. It is. He told her what the binding was, and he told her what it meant, and he told her what it would give her, and he told her clearly that she did not have to accept it, and that his position on Crest and the Conclave did not depend on her answer. She sat with it for a long time. The thing it gives me. The strength. A fraction of mine. Enough to make a difference in a physical confrontation. It is not unlimited, and it is not permanent without renewal. Is it given or taken? Given. Every time? Every time. I want to be clear that I am not doing this because I am frightened and I need protection. I am doing this because Crest is coming back in 64 hours, and I want to be able to contribute something to what happens when he does. I understand, and I want to be clear that the contributing part is not your decision. Also understood. Okay, the binding was a small cut on her palm and his, pressed together, and a phrase in a language she did not know that he taught her word by word until she could say it correctly, and she was the one who spoke it first, and he followed. And when it was done, she felt something settle in her chest that was warm and deep and tasted, oddly, like the coffee from the first morning. She flexed her hand. Show me where they're likely to come from. He showed her. They came at 3 in the morning on the 3rd day, which was 12 hours ahead of when Caelum had calculated. And she understood later that this was the point, that they had paid someone inside the household for the information, and that the 12 hours was the window they had bought. The first breach was the north gate. She heard it from the hall, a sound like a large tree coming down, and then Caelum was moving, and he was a different kind of thing in motion than she had understood from standing next to him in quiet rooms. He told her, "East corridor. Stay behind the second door. Do not open it for anyone who does not say the word he gave her. And if they come through the wall, then you know what to do." He was already gone. She went to the east corridor. She stood behind the second door and she listened, and she heard the fight the way you hear something happening to a person you know, through walls and floors and the particular sounds of someone she had already learned to read at a distance. She heard him hit something very large. She heard it hit a wall. She heard another sound she could not identify, and then she heard his voice giving an instruction to one of his lieutenants, and it was calm, and she breathed against the door. Then she heard the window at the end of the east corridor. She looked at her nursing kit. She picked up the IV bag. 1 liter normal saline in its sealed pouch. Solid, heavy, swung from its tubing. She picked up the laryngoscope. Steel handle. Point, she stood up straight. The window came in. The first one through the window was large and fast, and entirely unprepared for the fact that she was standing directly beside it rather than away from it. She swung the IV bag by its tubing in a full arc, and the glass pouch connected with his left temple with a sound she recognized from emergency presentations of blunt trauma, and he went sideways against the corridor wall and stayed there. She turned. The second was already in the corridor, and he was faster, supernaturally so, which she had been told to expect, and he had her arm before she finished turning. He was looking at her with the particular contempt of someone who had been briefed that she was a mortal woman of no particular significance, and she let him hold the arm for exactly the amount of time it took her to get the laryngoscope handle in her other hand. She drove it into the soft point below his jaw. She had been taught that in a different context, years ago, for an entirely different purpose, and she had filed it away the same way she filed everything, accurately and without deciding in advance whether it would be useful. He dropped. She stood in the corridor with the broken IV bag dripping onto the floor and looked at both of them. The first one was looking at her from the floor with an expression she had not anticipated, which was not anger. It was bewilderment. With the same professional calm she used for patients who had underestimated the severity of their condition, "Stay down." He stayed down. She heard Caelum's voice from the main hall, closer now, and she felt the warmth in her chest from the binding. And she stood in the corridor between the 2 men she had put on the floor, and she waited. He came around the corner of the east corridor, and he stopped. He looked at the 2 men on the floor. He looked at her. He looked at the broken IV bag and the laryngoscope in her hand. "I did tell you I wanted to contribute." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, something in the old language she did not know yet, and she understood later that it was not addressed to her. Crest was in the main hall. He had 4 men left standing, and 2 of them were not fully standing. Caelum walked into the hall, and Crest looked at him, and then, for the first time since Mirabel had seen him, he looked uncertain. "I offered you a process. You chose a different one." He dealt with Crest's remaining men with a speed and economy that she watched from the doorway, and filed away under things that are true about him. It was not theatrical. It was not prolonged. It was the behaviour of someone who had done something many times and found the most efficient version of it. Crest was left standing. Caelum took him by the lapel and walked him to the front door and spoke to him in a voice she could not fully hear from the doorway, but she saw Crest's face change several times in the space of 30 seconds. Caelum released him. His voice carried back to where she stood. You will go back to the conclave and you will tell them that the witness provision was applied, and that the outcome was determined, and that the matter of the elder's conduct and the bonded asset contract will be presented to the full council in 30 days. You will tell them that the woman in question has made her own position clear, and you will tell them that anyone who tests that position will find that she is more than adequately prepared to defend it. Crest looked at her. She looked back. He left. The 4 witnesses behind him, 2 of his men, 2 of Caelum's lieutenants who had arrived in the hall, watched him go, and then they looked at her, and she saw the moment each of them revised something. The house was quiet. She found him in the east hall near the window, which was a place he seemed to return to. He had his back to her, and he was looking at the grounds, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was doing the thing people did after violence, which was returning to themselves from wherever the violence took them. She crossed the room. He turned when she was close. You should not be comfortable in the same room as what you just watched me do. I've been in emergency care for 11 years. I've watched people do a great many things to other people. That is not the same. No, but it's not nothing. Either. He was quiet. I am going to be this, for as long as there is any version of me. There is no other version. The man who sat in your library and talked about 400 years is the same thing that just walked through the front hall. I am not asking you to be comfortable with it. I am telling you what is true. She thought about the first night, the supply room, the bolt-giving, and the hospital corridor, 11 at night, where a woman who noticed had decided that was enough. When I told you about the chair. In the hallway. Yes, you went and sat in it. Something moved across his face. I know what you are. I cleaned it off your hands and I didn't flinch then and I'm not flinching now. That was not comfort. That was just me telling you what was true. She reached up and touched the side of his face the same way she had in the library, and he closed his eyes. I think we're going to be fine. After a moment, that is an extraordinarily optimistic assessment. I'm a nurse. Optimistic assessment is a professional liability. 3 days after the siege, Mrs. Harrow asked Mirabel if she preferred her coffee with the hot milk poured in the cup first, or the coffee poured first, because apparently the king had very specific opinions about this that Mrs. Harrow had been disagreeing with for 40 years. Mirabel said she would need to try both before she had a view. Mrs. Harrow said that was the most sensible thing anyone had said about the coffee in 4 decades, and went away looking satisfied. Mirabel stood in the kitchen with her nursing kit on the table, cataloguing what she needed to restock, and thought about the fact that she was in a kitchen that was not a supply room, with a window that had real light, in a house that no one in her life before 3 weeks ago would have been able to find on any map. She thought about what it felt like to stand in a corridor and wait. She thought about what it felt like not to be waiting to leave. This is a story about what happens when someone who has spent her whole life being told she has a wait decides, one midnight, to call someone instead of running the list again. It is about what it costs to be seen accurately, and what you owe the person who sees you, and how sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply not flinch. If you like this story, leave a comment and tell us what moment landed hardest. Share it with someone who would understand why Mirabel cleaned the blood off his hands before she asked a single question. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Dark Romance Chronicles.